When we negotiated, I was part of a negotiating team within the Canadian government in 1987 to negotiate a protection, a legally binding treaty to protect the ozone layer. We succeeded in 1987 in protecting the ozone layer. One critical ingredient to the Montreal Protocol to protect the ozone layer was the sanctions that would be placed on any country that violated the terms of the Montreal Protocol. So if a country chose to manufacture and use CFCs, any other party to the Convention of Montreal Protocol could have used trade sanctions to punish that country. That was the sanction, the mechanism in the Montreal Protocol that made it not only legally binding, but gave it some teeth. By 1997, only a decade later, when the same countries in the world met in Kyoto to negotiate a protocol to protect us from the climate crisis, the Canadian Minister of Environment, I can remember her saying as she went to Kyoto, that if a trade sanction was part of the Kyoto Protocol, Canada would not ratify, Canada would not sign. What happened between 1987 and 1997? The creation of the World Trade Organization. The only thing that changed, it was a mechanism that worked in the Montreal Protocol, and further to Jose's point about the United Nations, the United Nations Charter says explicitly in its opening language that no other international agreement will ever be allowed to have supremacy over the United Nations Charter. The United Nations Charter is the foundational document for world and for governments around the world in multilateralism. And yet, the negotiation of the World Trade Organization, without a single ruling from that organization, with the mere fact that the Committee on Trade and Environment within the WTO asked itself the question, are there environmental treaties out there that get in the way of trade? They never have asked whether there are trade agreements that get in the way of survival, but are there environmental treaties that get in the way of trade? So I just wanted to reinforce this point before moving to what I was going to say. Sorry. And there are real links to all of these agreements, and we need to figure out how we in Copenhagen, I couldn't agree more with Senator Christine Milne, my colleague from Australia. It is not too late for a legally binding agreement here. We must never abandon the hope and the demand that our governments do what is needed to protect our world. This is our opportunity. Copenhagen is the deadline for these negotiations. And if they slip, or if there is failure, we're in a lot of trouble. So we should never reduce our expectations based on people like the Prime Minister from my country, Stephen Harper, being the first to declare that Copenhagen was a failure before it could start. So I'm also going to report to you briefly on the politics of climate for North America, which is a stretch because I'm Canadian. By the way, the real leaders for Canada are here in this room. I know Maud Barlow is here from Council of Canadians International Forum on Globalization, and my deputy leader, Jacques Savard, and all the youth from Canada who are here. That's where the real leadership comes from Canada, not from our government. Our government, for those of you who don't know, is what's called in parliamentary democracy a minority government. It's a sad result of something that most of you don't suffer from. It's called the first past the post voting system. And it means that the minority of parliamentarians, the minority of public opinion, control who's in government. And unfortunately, and I do want to share with you the good news that most of the members of Parliament, the Canadian Parliament, most of Canadians, through public opinion and demands, want real climate action and want Canada to do what's right. The fact that we are here and we deserve every fossil a day award we get. Our government has gone forward saying on day one of the negotiations that we have no intention of changing our position. We're not here to negotiate. We have, of course, put our priority on the growth of the tar sands. And every time our government tells you that our targets are realistic, what they mean is the targets are realistic to allow for the growth of the tar sands. That sense of realism has nothing whatsoever to do with science, climate change, benefits to the Canadian economy, and doing the right thing. So our government is taking an appalling position. We are the only country, I explained this yesterday to CBC News, they said, is it really fair for people around the world to single Canada out and criticize Canada. Is that really fair? And I said, well, yes, it's quite fair. We are the only country that signed and ratified Kyoto, that's a party to a legally binding treaty, that chose to publicly repudiate the targets, cancel all our climate programs, have zero money available for renewable energy, zero. That's the federal government contribution to renewable energy in Canada, zero. So our policies are appalling, and I'm hopeful that, I do remain hopeful, that the pressure on our government through this conference, both here in Copenhagen and coming from Canadians at home, will push even the most reluctant of government representatives, I will not use the word leaders, the most reluctant of government representatives to move to at least not being in the way. But Rebecca mentioned our hopefulness around the election of Barack Obama. At last year's COP15 in Poznan, one of the only bright moments was when Al Gore took the stage and said, good news, by next year's meeting, the Bush administration will no longer be here, it will be the Obama administration, and things will be very different. And clearly Obama is not Bush, but it appears the United States is still the United States. The Congress and the Senate are a big part of the problem of government there. Barack Obama made the enormous mistake of handing over the development of his climate change plan to the Congress and Senate. The Waxman-Markey bill might have been enough in its initial launch to the Senate and Congress. There are a lot of problems with cap and trade. It's not where I would go. But when you take a cap and trade bill and put it through a meat grinder that has all the right buttons to push for patronage and graft and exemptions, you end up with a bill as it looks now. And if you have a cap and trade system where every party has to auction with real money for carbon credits, well, maybe it might work. But when you've already riddled that particular bill with exemptions for coal, exemptions for certain kinds of plants, you've really got a problem. And President Obama has a serious problem. I heard earlier today at one of the side events, Secretary of Energy of the United States, Stephen Chu, who clearly understands. He's a Nobel Prize winner in physics. He gets the science. He presented for us a range of exciting possibilities that will replace fossil fuels. If the United States government, if Barack Obama as president, has the moral courage to do what's right, not just for his presidency, not just for the Democratic Party, but for his own children, if he does it for his children, he will stand up here and say things that currently cannot pass the U.S. Congress. Because what can pass the Congress doesn't pass the test of the atmosphere. What can pass the Congress is not good enough for anyone. What leadership requires. Stepping out in front of this issue. If President Barack Obama can do the things we pray for, that we know he's capable of, if he inspired people to hope and change, can he believe it himself? Can he give us hope? Can he give us change? And can he change the U.S. position so that it goes closer to the EU position, so that all of us together can know that the targets are real, that we go to 350 parts per million as our goal, that we avoid 2 degrees Celsius, that we go to 1.5, which goodness knows is dangerous enough. We must demand what's required to protect the living world. We are now in the business of saving lives. This is the time when courage is required of all of us, and we must demand better from every single government in that room. Thank you.
Leadership and sometimes leaders themselves hide behind parliaments or public opinion in order not to do the things that they should actually do. So we heard what we really need.